Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which is wrapped in more layers of turbulence every week, it seems. Geopolitical, political, environmental, climatic, societal. And I thought it'd be good to kick back slightly and talk to someone who's been navigating the landscape that currently is called the United States of America. That, of course, predates that definition. And he's a photographer, Peter Guttman, who is best known for traveling the entire world in pretty much every country on the planet. Has won numerous awards repeatedly for his travel journalism. But through my old friend Randy Olson, I became aware of a book Peter has done recently, which I'm just going to change the layout here so you can see it. It's called American Character: Surprising Portraits of an Unseen Nation. And I've been captivated by the book, especially in the context of current events. We're in a world and a country right now where our divisions are, at least in the rhetoric around things like governing, and which protest you go to is all about division and polarization. And a photographer, to get close to people, as you've done in this book, these are portraits. They're really people, in action, doing their thing. You have to speak with them. You have to get comfortable with them. And Peter, you have your own background and your own biases. And I just wrote a piece today, again, about how to overcome the differences among us. And one of them is just sort of small talk and getting to know people. So I'm pleased to have you here. We're going to talk about the book and show and tell a little bit from it. And I just thought I'd start with just the basic question of how did you become who you are so far? What drew you into photography and your peripatetic approach to it?
Well, thanks so much, Andy. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. I essentially started out as an artist, having weathered a 19-year-old midlife crisis in college when I decided that the work I was doing, researching the artificial heart, was not the way I wanted to go in life, and I wanted as expansive an experience on this planet as possible. And I wound up getting a degree in geography. And up to that point, I had been doing a kind of art called magic realism. And I also realized I was not going to be making a living selling that kind of artwork or paintings because it was so painstaking and I just couldn't bear to part with it. So that kind of morphed into an interest in photography, which I then took on the road with me after college as I decided the first way I would manifest this geography degree would be as a tour guide in front of a motor coach that was taking trips, sometimes as much as 28 days long, across the North American continent. And
Wow.
during that time, I was photographing and gathering images into a portfolio, and then eventually meeting up with creative directors at various magazines and at books. And fortunately, there was a fantastic match at Fodor's, which was a giant, it was the largest English language guidebook company in the world. And my images started appearing on their book covers. That was
Mhm.
sort of like a loose sketch of my earliest beginnings.
And again, you've been around the world. Are there places where you settled in the most, or have done the most photography before we get to the United States
Yeah, well,
views we're going to look at?
no, that's a good question. I've been at this point in 256 countries and territories, and so I've seen almost every section of the planet. A couple of years ago, I was named a fellow at the Explorers Club in New York, the
Hmm.
oldest exploration society in the world. Theodore Roosevelt was one of its founding members, and during my travels, I was particularly fascinated by chronicling indigenous people. So, in a lot of um, very far-flung nations, I spent some time with Melpa Wigmen or the Guayami in Peru or the Yagua in the Amazon and the Satan in Mongolia. I was particularly fascinated by their way of living. And during this time, I should say concurrently, I was also very much still scouring our own country, its
Mhm.
back roads and hidden corners. I was somewhat of a road warrior here in the United States. And in fact, to attest to that, I still have a map that I update regularly with ballpoint pen lines that show every road I've ever been on in my entire life, which is
Wow.
certainly a bit of an act of insanity, admittedly. But nonetheless, I that interest that I had in indigenous people made me even more acutely aware of how extremely diverse our own population here is in the United States of America. Um,
Right.
it got me thinking about why that might be. And I don't know, it's something maybe a lot of people take for granted, but we have the by far the most diverse geographical landforms on the planet. I mean, no other country has deserts and rainforests and glaciers and slot canyons and Everglades and volcanoes and fjords and prairies and bayous and beaches. It's just amazing. And so this accounts for this incredible sorting out that the original settlers did into extremely different niches across our country, and later on determined a lot of the political leanings and prevailing winds we see in politics today.
That's so interesting. I think people lose track of that sometimes. A long, long time ago in the New York Times, I did a piece, just a really short thing for the weekend review section, proposing that some of the divisions about, well, let me back up. The lack of a unified thinking about climate change or climate in general isn't surprising in a country that has that variegated landscape you just described. Even today, you pick any day, there's extreme weather somewhere in America, and we will have a heat dome over most of the East Coast coming up in the next few days. But if you're in the West, you're experiencing a completely different climate, and it's hard to think why we would have a unified sense of that issue. And when you look at the political landscape, as you've just been describing, that sorting process has really led to almost natural divisions. I was just reading an essay about this that, oh God, I can't remember who wrote it, but it was about how social media has forced us out of our sorted geographies, so that now we're clashing more because the people who've grown up in and or become familiar with a particular way of life are now sort of experiencing the full suite when they turn on their phone. I don't know if that makes sense. You've talked, one reason I wanted to reach out to you for Sustain What it was because you talk to people, all these folks that you've taken pictures of are people you've met and had to convince to spend time with. So talk about that process. I don't know if you recall this particular character from your book.
Yeah, he is a cranberry harvester in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. The Pine Barrens is actually the largest wilderness along the central coast of eastern United States. And I was always fascinated by that region because it's a really a beautiful, mythic, almost ceremony that takes place deep in the barrens every year as the cranberries are harvested. And a lot of people don't realize that they're grown on bushes that line these bogs that then get flooded. And with almost like an aquatic lawnmower of sorts, a beater that you see behind this gentleman, they will march in procession and sort of whip those submerged bushes so that the berries all float to the top. Each berry has like four little air chambers in it, so it makes it quite buoyant. And then they're corralled and brought, they're kind of shoveled together and up a moving conveyor belt onto awaiting trucks and off to the Ocean Spray Cooperative packing plants. And
Mhm.
he is one of a large squadron of people, mostly seasonal workers, that come to this area every September. The harvest usually begins the last week in September and goes to about the first week in November. Um, Oftentimes, when I meet these people, it is kind of a serendipitous experience in that something else might have fascinated me, in this instance, the harvesting of cranberries. And in the course of investigating those traditions that we have in our country, I meet up with these people. It wasn't so much that I was going out only to meet unique people, but I really allowed serendipity to play a major role in my encounters.
Right, and that's something that um, I've written about a little bit in the context of if you want to foster understanding across the different landscapes of both belief and geography and economy in this country, there has to be a little bit of a sort of guts in reaching out, getting being comfortable with the new or the different, or saying hi to someone you might normally not say hi to.
Well, I've always felt that really one of the most important qualities a person can have is curiosity. I feel that way
Mhm.
very strongly, and I think that that is, for the most part, a driving energy behind a good deal of my artwork and artistic output and creativity. And it also helps to inform the directions and paths that I like to explore. So I have spent a huge amount of time, and initially, perhaps this started as a tour guide around the United States, where I was providing narration and the history of our country, that I really started realizing the astonishing array of lifestyles and philosophies and religions and traditions and cultures that managed to coexist in this incredibly huge, diverse country of ours.
Yeah, it's pretty. The book is a real mosaic or prism of all of that. Here's Shaker Eldris,
Yeah,
very different.
Mildred Barker. She was one of the last remaining Shakers on the planet. Actually, there are three left right now, and I
Hmm.
did meet a Shaker a few months ago, who's not. This is not that person. Mildred passed away many years ago, but she was an eldris at the last remaining community of the Shakers, Sabbath Day Lake in Maine. And at
Hmm.
one point, there was 16 of these utopian communities spread mostly throughout the eastern portion of the United States. And the Shakers were very hardworking but and innovative people who were responsible for the invention of the flat broom and clothespins and washing machines. And they were well known for their cultivation, their the gardening that they did, and the seasoning and spicing that they used in a lot of their cooking, as well as in furniture making. They were really quite an accomplished group of people. But unfortunately, one of their main tenets in their religion is that of celibacy. And so that kind of was a premonition of sorts as to how their populations were eventually going to dwindle, because
Wow.
before long there became laws about adopting people into groups, and that's how they would refresh their ranks. They would oftentimes adopt orphans from orphanages, and
Oh, that's so interesting. I didn't know that.
yeah, and so that was no longer legal, and it became more and more difficult to actually become a shaker. And as I mentioned, they live a rather highly disciplined life. And this is the worship house of Sabbath Day Lake in southern Maine.
So remarkable. Yeah. For those who don't know, based in Down East Maine now myself, and here are other folks from your book
That gentleman, Willie Seabury, he was kind of a legend down south as a proprietor of one of the last remaining juke joints in the country. Juke joints were these very rural, rustic cabins in the middle of the woods where sharecroppers, mostly African American and descendants of slaves that were still working the fields, would kick back at the end of a week and come and enjoy blues music that was often performed live. And this was in Marigold, Mississippi, at a place called Poor Monkey Lounge. Um, Willie Seabury also has passed away. It's when the book was going to come out, I made it a point to try to get in touch with as many of these characters as possible. And this book, unlike most of my books, spanned decades. And even though it is definitely meant as a snapshot of our country in its current condition, it still began decades ago as I scoured the country looking for unique stories. And it was sort of shocking to me the number of people that had passed away, but others, thankfully, were still around and were absolutely thrilled to be featured in the book, which was always the most gratifying, heartening moment of my phone calls. It was fun to almost play Santa Claus with those people and tell them that
yeah.
they were in this book.
I found it once in a while as a journalist. I've circled back to old stories or get in touch with people, and it also gives you a sense of the changes that are underway as well. The It can be interesting and depressing and or exciting depending on the situation.
Exactly. This gentleman that you see, John Rusky, aside from being an accomplished blues musician, he's playing the steel guitar there. He also was a rather accomplished river explorer, and as a young person, I think he was a teenager at the time. He hand carved his own boat and took it all the way from near the source of the Mississippi River near Lake Itasca in Minnesota down to Tennessee, where it eventually capsized south of Memphis. But it
Mm.
was there he decided to put up roots in the Mississippi Delta. And he eventually went on to become a curator at the Delta Blues Museum in Clarksdale, Mississippi. And
Yeah,
quite a colorful character, a modern day Huck Finn of sorts.
that's remarkable. And boy, what a difference here. I think I'm in
Yeah,
Switzerland.
Uh, yeah, Bob Johnson, he was the proprietor of the Enzian Inn that is located in Leavenworth, Washington, which essentially maybe 20, 30 years ago reinvented itself from a dwindling lumber town into sort of like a Bavarian themed fairyland of sorts. And you can see a lot of Bavarian style architecture, and it attracted a lot of people with Bavarian roots. And here at the Enzian Inn, he would actually climb up onto the balcony edge there. I took this shot when he was, I think, in his 80s, and he was like an octogenarian bugler on the roof who would play morning serenades after breakfast at the inn. And I believe it's a tradition that has now been taken over by his children. So it's quite an amazing place. You can see the mountains of the Cascades in the background. This is in eastern Washington.
I was muted because my dogs were doing their Alphorn playing.
I see. That's okay.
Yeah. Bigfoot seeker. Wait, that can't be the right person.
No, no,
Who?
that's the right person.
Oh, is it
He
really? Okay.
yeah,
So
yeah.
tell what's going on here.
Okay, I'll tell you what's going on there. You may have second guessed yourself because in the back you see goats, and
Yeah.
I also have a goat packer in the book. In this instance, he's actually the guy that wrote the Bible on goat packing, John Mayanzinski, who lived in a cabin that he built in the Wind River range of Wyoming. I think he built it at the total cost of about $75 or so from spare parts and things he picked up here and there. And he lived it's near the Continental Divide. And aside from being a goat packer, he is also an acclaimed scientist. And
Hmm.
he had originated goat packing as a means to transport a great deal of his scientific equipment on the back of goats that could climb the mountains and allow him to reach inaccessible places with all his equipment that you couldn't necessarily pack onto horses or llamas. And so the goats were able to climb ridges. And he did this scientific experimentation out in the field. And one day, under a 6-foot tent, he actually saw the silhouette of a giant hand atop his tent and kind of struggling to get out of it. He saw some figure retreat in the distance. I think this was at nighttime, but found fresh, large prints there and decided that Bigfoot was indeed real. And he devoted a good deal of the rest of his time to trying to trace Bigfoot. I know that he's been featured in National Geographic specials where they're trying to find some scientific credibility and speakers that
Oh,
can talk about the possibility of Bigfoot's existence. And it's actually not as far fetched as one would imagine. A Bigfoot is a cryptid, which is the word for what is thought to be a mythical animal. And it's turned out that a number of cryptids have, in fact, turned out to be real animals. The earliest version of that might be the platypus, which is an animal from down under that seems stitched together with a
right.
duck-like beak and a beaver-like tail. Or even more recently, the mountain gorilla at the beginning of the 20th century hadn't been confirmed at all. It was only in 1903
Um,
that its existence was confirmed. So my stories talk also about sort of the history of cryptids. I use a lot of these images as sort of gateways into discussing some unique aspects of American culture and traditions.
that's great. And it's good that there are people pushing the envelope of what we understand. And what a contrast here with Pete Seeger, my old friend who departed us. Gosh, I think it's a decade ago now. A real true American in so many ways, and complicated figure like many Americans as well. What
Sure,
was it like being
absolutely.
with him?
This was this shot was taken at the Clearwater Festival at Croton on
Hmm.
Hudson, and one of his great missions in life was to clear up the Hudson River, which he spent a good deal of time doing. And he launched a boat called the Clearwater, which still plies the waters between various river towns along the Hudson River and teaches young people the importance of the environment and also cleaning up the water systems. I think even it's done such a good job that it's eliminated some of the animals that used to chew on piers out in the
That's right.
lower regions of the harbors in New York. And he, of course, was so instrumental in a lot of the civil rights songs. And If I Had a Hammer, Where Have All the Flowers Gone? And
Right.
even We Shall Overcome, he kind of retuned to his own
Right.
stylings and made into quite an anthem.
One of my favorite books is by a biologist. Is the title was "Heartbeats in the Muck," and it was about the restoration of New York Harbor, about all the creatures that are coming back. Um,
Exactly.
there's a
I
message
think,
here from
yeah,
the guy who introduced me to you. Randy Olson says, "My favorite photo book ever. I gave more than 20 copies as Christmas presents last year. Every person wrote back with huge thanks and raves about how much time they spent reading the profiles." And Randy, yes, I have it here. again,
Yeah,
thanks to you.
Randy Olson. Actually, I included in the book, full disclosure, and he
Right.
deserves to be in it. He's quite a colorful character,
It is
and
indeed.
perhaps a lot of different nomenclature could be used to describe his career, but and I'm sure he'll somehow take dispute with whatever characterization I come up with at the moment. But he was a fairly distinguished marine biologist who then got tenured at a university in New England and decided to give all of that up to tell stories that he deemed to be even more important, and learned filmmaking, I think at USC or in
Mhm.
Southern California. He directed three major films, and he's had a lot of smaller films, and some of them have been featured at big film festivals. I know Sizzle, which was the considered the first global warming comedy ever, and A Flock of the Dodos, which I think explored a lot of how Kansas itself, Kansas and parts of Middle America were having trouble understanding scientific embrace of evolution. And he also kind of quite adroitly infiltrated people of quite a different mindset in putting together his documentaries. And then he went on to write a number of books. Houston, we have a narrative. A lot of these books explored storytelling and why scientists, in many ways, are losing the battle to convince America about the dangers and perils of global warming. And he developed a system of storytelling that he feels makes storytelling a lot more effective. You should pick up one of his books and
Oh, I
check it
have.
out.
He's been on my show several times. I'm sure he's chuckling right now, and I'm a fan
Some
of
of
his
your
kind
audience is familiar with him.
of. Hopefully, yeah, the consistent visitors here would be. And
So,
hello out in Malibu, Randy. Um, so back into the depths of the book. Here's an issue that we deal with right now, day to day, with what's happening with farm workers. I'm not. Let's see. I can't remember. Is this an immigrant worker?
almost definitely he is. This was a chili picker near Hatch, New Mexico, where some of the country's
Yeah, there you go.
most acclaimed chili comes from. But I never ask these people whether they're a citizen of the United States or not. I mean, it's sort of outside the ken of my probing, and I would
Sure.
assume he probably is a migrant worker, as so many
Yeah.
farm workers are these days, as they're being chased away by the ice patrols. But he's an important part of what makes Chile, New Mexico, the chili capital of North America.
Yeah, and we'll see how this plays out, but I assume as this terrorization, this fear mongering effort expands, people will start to understand the implications for their local economies in so many parts of the country, not just their economies, but their social fabric.
Yeah, it's quite the dilemma that the most potent method by which a good segment of the country will understand the damage is that they will have to be experiencing and undergoing a good deal of that damage to really incorporate that into their realizations.
Yeah, it's really a shame that direct experience seems to be something that's required for people to really absorb issues, even though we have all these ways to connect people with ideas and stories now, like we're doing here. If it doesn't hit you directly, it seems to just sort of flow right past people, unfortunately.
You know,
Yeah.
I did in some regards try to make some effort to keep politics at only a low boil in
Mhm.
this book. But I tried to temper political fevers by trying to explain a good deal of the origins of why different people feel the way they do. not just about politics, but really it started out how they felt about government. And a good deal of that occurred during this huge, what I would call the big sort, of people getting, realize that originally this country attracted settlers from around the world. And these settlers entered the ancestral homeland, the ancestral residence of the continent's human population, and they made themselves right at home. And of course, that took a couple of centuries to play out, but they sorted amongst these various landforms, as I mentioned, and the ones that move further and further west beyond sort of what I referred to as the geological chain link fence that hemmed in a good deal of the population initially, those people tended to be more hardy, more daring, more risk taking, and had less of a concern about government regulations, government assistance. They more or less felt like they could make it on their own. And so they developed a deeper natural resentment toward rules and regulations. And this is sort of like a rough outline of why, in many instances, politics play out so differently across our country. And even
Right.
though it can't necessarily be relegated to East versus West, we see how it plays out very definitely when we see electoral maps and how blue the urban areas are and how red the rural areas are. And it's a perfect prototypical example of what I was just discussing.
Absolutely. And here's a farmhouse couple from Iowa in a
Yeah,
very familiar image.
right.
What?
This backdrop, many people would probably recognize from that famed Grant Wood painting from 1930
Yeah,
called American Gothic. And
yeah,
I made it a point to travel to Ottumwa, or near Ottumwa, Iowa. It's really Eldon, Iowa, where they had a little historic society, and there are couples that volunteer to actually don the original style clothing of the two subjects in that famous painting, and they posed for me. And this is almost like a modern day version of what back then represented. Well, there were a lot of interpretations of it, but it kind of represented the rural naivete of the nation at that point. I
yeah,
think that that next shot that you were showing is of a
yeah.
beekeeper, and he's wearing a bee beard. And the funny thing is, I had mentioned a little earlier about how I felt my the most important human quality you could have is curiosity. And
Oops.
so
There you
if we go to the if we hang on that bee beard for a moment,
go. Yeah.
um, that was the first ever example, I think, of how I use Google, which is my favorite invention since I've been born because how it caters to my curiosity. I use Google to learn more about bee beards, and it helped me to actually locate someone who was demonstrating a bee beard at a country fair in upstate New York. That was back in 1999 when Google had just been introduced.
Incredible. And quite a contrast here, aging hippie in Woodstock. I spent 30 years in the Hudson Valley and played music with a lot of aging hippies like this one.
Yeah, you might even recognize him if you've ever been to Woodstock. He's sort of like a mainstay there. And now I've learned he's sort of a controversial guy with a colorful and somewhat notorious past background, but he's filled with all sorts of symbols, at least image-wise, indicating peace and love. And he apparently was one of the original attendees at the Woodstock festival, which didn't take place in Woodstock, but rather in White Lake, some 45 miles away from the town of Woodstock itself. But he
Yeah.
certainly embraced the spirit that the 1960s became known for. Even though many would say the 60s began like in the last few months of 1969, when the Woodstock Festival took place.
Right. And whoops, hold on a second. let me, this is, oh, here we go. Whoops. The slideshow is lagging. It's kind of weird. Let me get to, again, more sort of performers. This is a quirky one.
The prostitute impressionist, who basically is one of the living reenactors at Dodge City in Kansas, which at one point was considered the most dangerous spot in the West. And it's also where the red light district was said to have originated. It's one of a number of theories of that, but there was a saloon that had a red light that would indicate when ladies of the night were in residence. And she, I think, carries forth some of that frontier spirit that entertained a lot of the transient characters that came through seeking their fortunes in gold prospecting and cattle rustling and such.
Amazing. And whoops, sorry. I'm my own producer here. There's no magical person behind the stage. So what are some of the um, overall impressions you've gotten that we haven't talked about yet? Clearly, landscape and history have created a country of extraordinary diversity and of profession, of culture and attitude. I think certainly. And when you think about where we're at in the world right now today, is there lessons you've learned in navigating that landscape that kind of resonate or that are worth sharing?
You know, the honest truth is, I myself have not changed much in the way I approach people. Of course, it's a more fraught situation now when one discusses politics. But I have to say, um, even in the past, before it became this rather difficult, polarizing time, I didn't often talk about politics. My approach generally tended to be showing interest in the unique activities that these people were engaged in. And so
Right.
many of these activities really had their hand in aspects of our country's own development. I liked hanging out with people that would forage for a ramp or harvest wheat or do flax scutching, all of which is in the book. And just by showing an interest, people, you really can kind of immediately locate the universal nature of people's um, good intentions, and the people are basically very hardworking. Although I do have included in this book, I have a couple that might show otherwise. I have a squatter included in the book who lives in Southern California at a rather unique spot near Salvation Mountain, which is where there's a whole city of people that are squatting and living off the grid at an abandoned military base. And I also have a disgraced congressman in there, George Santos, who is in the book, because I did not want this book so much to be and solely an homage to heroic figures, but I did want it across the board to display the unique spectrum of personalities that we have in our country. And so, you know, I like to feel, I appreciate the word you use, navigate. I like to feel that I've been able to navigate through this uh, rather serpentine, labyrinthine maze of very varied and assorted and sordid
Mm,
personalities. Yeah, there's George Santos, who you can probably
yeah.
tell from this image I didn't have much in terms of personal interaction with, but it was interesting that he was there essentially just to further elevate his media profile. This was taken the day that Donald Trump was indicted for the first time at the
Wow.
courthouse in Lower Manhattan.
Remarkable. And that says something, right, also about the media itself, the landscape of social media and media. You can see he's surrounded by live streams and cameras that hyper amplify
It surely
situation.
does. And when you mention social media, I can't begin to really explain how much damage I think it has done in many sectors of our society. I don't want to sound completely misanthropic or or like a real Luddite, but there are areas in which it has really done a deleterious effect in bringing up kids in travel. In my own experiences traveling around the world and photographing some of these hidden gems that are deep in the wilderness. Um, I've seen that if you go back to these really fragile and unique places, now they are filled with media influencers whose main interest is essentially promoting themselves and basically stamping a "you are here" kind of thing, like Kilroy was here kind of graffiti across
Right.
the internet to show that they were here and they were here, and a lot of these places are now overrun by people, and it's not a very pretty scene. And it's also really disabled young people as they are growing up to not spend as much time in face-to-face encounters with other people. They are hiding behind screens. What I also dub as like the very thin pleasures of electronic positive reinforcement with thumbs up and hearts that they're getting most of their emotional fulfillment from, as opposed
Yeah.
to going out there and actually talking with people and speaking to people. And really, that's the way you kind of get at you know what people are all about. In my imagery, I try really hard to capture sort of like the pre-internet scene. So I try to kind of be strict with that. I try not to ever have images where people are holding iPhones or even wearing baseball caps or sunglasses.
Right.
Even T-shirts with words on them. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but there was no such thing as T-shirts with words on them back in the early '60s and before that. It's only in recent decades that people decided to become sort of corporate shills for big companies and to brag about where they were and what they did, or what they
Right.
think, and it obviated the need to actually have a conversation with them. Here, this
Yeah.
image is of a nuclear physicist taken at Brookhaven lab out on Long Island. This is part of the giant equipment that is helping to recreate the Big Bang and helping to understand the Big Bang theory. There's only two of these pieces of equipment that are in existence right now, this in Brookhaven and one in Switzerland as well. And this, I guess, would be a good example of how I wasn't solely trying to capture, let's call Trump supporters. I have nuclear physicists and ballerinas and people that
Right.
might more likely perhaps have voted for Kamala Harris, but um, I'm not certain in the book I ever once mentioned the name of Donald Trump, but um, it's kind of interesting how people have sorted themselves out politically in such a sad way. I was just reading about the number of families that have been broken up, and people that don't speak to each other anymore because of the polarized nature of political beliefs. It's quite something.
It really is something. Randy also sent in a comment request. He said, I have to ask you about your legendary end of the year slideshows. Are you still doing them? And we were talking about this a minute ago, but what goes on in that room that you're sitting in? Or
Well, yeah, perhaps behind me you can notice a bit of a crazy museum, which is essentially my living room is entirely coated on every single surface, including the ceiling, with handmade artifacts that I have brought back from my travels around the planet. As an artist, I've always been fascinated in artistic traditions, and I kind of chose my living room as the venue to project these slideshows that I gave every year for about 36 years, that essentially chronicled my year in travels around the planet. And it ranged from Indiana Jones style expeditions to far-flung nations or icebreakers to the North Pole, all the way to tiny little treasures and jewels that could be found in my own neighborhood or in other people's neighborhoods, and trying to encourage people to go out and look at things that they may have taken for granted, and
Hmm.
sort of what's behind that corner, what's just around the corner, or what's down that cellar, and
Yep.
and um, it's created quite a following. National Public Radio called it one of the hottest tickets in New York. The New York
Yeah.
Times wrote about it on three different occasions, and it was held in abeyance after the shutting down of everything with COVID, and we have not yet had it reinstated. But I'm hoping for the end of this year to start the slideshows again.
Well, that's pretty cool. And I have to bring up an image from the book, which is highly relevant today. Whoops. Give me 1 second. Here we go.
Oh, happy
It is.
Juneteenth Day!
This happens to be
Exactly.
Juneteenth. So,
That
what
is
led you
Laverne
to this
Ross.
picture?
Laverne Ross from the Calvary Baptist Church in Santa Monica, and she is one of the people responsible for essentially spreading the concept of Juneteenth out toward the West Coast. She did that a couple of decades ago, and I attended a Juneteenth ceremony at this church before it was made into a national holiday, and met her acquaintance, and really got turned on to some fantastic congregational church music that I still love, and it was quite the experience celebrating Juneteenth, which is celebrated oftentimes with strawberry shortcake and strawberry soda and reddish pink colors that are meant to be reminiscent of portions of the Yoruba culture back in Nigeria. And nowadays, fortunately there are more and more festivities taking place around the country celebrating Juneteenth, and some having historical pageants to celebrate the traditions of this holiday, which really occurred when slaves in Galveston, Texas, first belatedly learned of their independence several months after the Civil War had actually ended. And
Mhm.
they went forth and freed from their bondage, and began celebrating on this day when they first learned of their emancipation.
That's so remarkable. And a lepidopterist.
Yes, this was at this amazing butterfly museum that was up in the Catskills of New York, and
Hmm.
she actually inherited the museum from her father, who was like an obsessive collector of butterflies and moths, and some of the world's largest moths can be seen in this museum, and the country's filled with astonishingly unique museums that I have chronicled, as well as very interesting festivals of all sorts. I tend toward the very eccentric. I think in the book is also a testicle festival attendee, which was taken in Clinton, Montana, at a testicle festival, which was
Ay,
every
ay,
year
ay.
at Rock Creek Lodge. They would have people
Okay.
converge, often arriving on their motorcycles, and they would have a feast of fried bull testicles cooked up in a giant cauldron. And they'd actually have a beauty pageant of human contestants, where the contestants were judged by the female of the species. And I won't further detail the categories in which the judging took place, but I do gravitate toward very unique and eccentric things. And my next book is called Secret Wonders: Surprising Adventures for the Intrepid Traveler, and I think it will have a lot of sort of astonishing and unique um, uh, places to see and things to experience. They're published by Skyhorse, which has been doing a beautiful, beautiful job of publishing these books. Really excellent quality, and I'm very proud of having done. I think now it's 4 books with Skyhorse, and this next book is going to be my 10th book that I've had published.
Wow. Well, I can't recommend this one highly enough. As Randy and you were saying, it's just a feast of the diversity that makes America so unique, and that unfortunately right now, because of politics, that very diversity is at risk. It's kind of like biological diversity being at risk on the planet, and if we try to squeeze that out of this country, the diversity of attitudes, opinions, backgrounds, races, it's not going to bode well for America's future. Thank
I
you so
think,
much, Peter. Sorry,
yeah,
sorry. Any
I was just gonna say that I think it behooves all of us to become more aware of the richness of this diversity, especially as we're quickly approaching the semi quincentennial of our nation, a word that doesn't roll off the tongue, but it's making it. I think it makes this book a very important document of where we are at our 250th anniversary. And Andrew, thank you so very much for this opportunity. It was a lot of fun and a real pleasure speaking with you.
And I just wanted to make one more point. Well, before there's a whole section here that's very food oriented, and I think food has come up before in my webcasts as a thread that obviously there's specialized foods like challah here that I enjoy so much, but food is a pathway for understanding and communion, literally. Fried alligator servers, oyster man, of course, oyster cook, oyster shucker, lobsterman. I live among them here in Maine now. My wife's my cousin-in-law is a lobsterman, and
And
shad. Oh,
I
shad
think,
makes me sad
does it? Yeah,
because
because
the Hudson
it's
River
disappearing.
shad festivals are a thing of the past.
Yeah. There is one left in Essex, Connecticut. And you really
Hmm.
can't leave out the image on the cover, which is the eel trapper
Oh,
who
right.
who is quite the remarkable human being, a real iconoclast who lived off the grid in a stone cabin on the banks of the burbling Delaware River. And he hand builds this stone weir in the middle of the Delaware, where in September, after a full moon and rain, they come spilling down by the thousands, and he catches them in this handmade wooden contraption that he brings back to his smokehouse, and his recipes have actually been featured in Gourmet magazine as well. Ray
Remarkable.
Turner, quite a remarkable individual.
All right. Well, once again, Peter, thanks for coming on the show. And as soon as we're done with this, anyone watching can share it on all the different platforms you've been watching on. And I hope people can get out there and explore the diversity right around you, because right down the block, wherever you are, there's someone with a different attitude, different experience, different background, different cuisine, and get comfortable with that. Get out there and do the crosstalk and small talk that's necessary for us to remain cohesive amid all the efforts to make us the opposite. This is Andy Revkin. This is Sustain What? And tomorrow, Friday, I'm going to do another show right away with so come back, go to revkin.substack.com to find out more about tomorrow's show as well. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks so much, Andy.
And thanks to Randy for introducing me to your work. Take
Thank you,
care.
Randy.
Hold on one second.